I just received Alex Ross's new book, Fantastic Four Full Circle, and I thought I would share my thoughts on it with you. I must admit, I am not a huge Alex Ross fan normally. I think he is incredibly talented, but I dislike how off-model he draws characters. He doesn't draw Batman, he draws his own Batman. He doesn't draw Superman, he draws his own Superman. He puts seams on costumes that shouldn't have them. Drawing how he wants to is his right, and if he's getting paid for his work, I'm all for it. But personally, I like things to look accurate. However, there is no denying his artistic abilities, and that, along with what little I heard about this book, was encouraging enough to give it a try. After having read the story, and following that up by rereading the stories this one refers to and builds off of, I must say that I have mixed feelings. There were some things I did not like, and others I found very enjoyable. I will start with the pros. Alex Ross has outdone himself with the art in this book. His figure work is as impressive as ever, with the photorealism that is beyond eye-catching. His characters stay in proportion with one another and their surroundings, and they look the same from scene to scene. In a video he put out, Alex Ross showed that he built models of the Fantastic Four that he could light and angle to fit his artistic needs, and that has worked out tremendously well for him. The book almost looks like it's made up of photographs. Ross's handling of the characters, with a couple minor exceptions which I will get into later, was excellent. All of the characters were portrayed as they ought to be. Reed was a brilliant adventurer, Susan was a brave and caring maternal figure, Johnny was funny and a bit of a hotshot, and Ben was a tragic bruiser. The handling of Reed impressed me the most, seeing as how often writers get his character wrong. In fact, I did a whole video about who Reed Richards is, and how lazy, untalented writers have destroyed him over the years. The colors in the book were another point I liked. Normally, I do not like funky coloring in comics. I like nice, flat colors. But I think it complements his art and the story very well to have the strange lighting and odd colors. He also showed Susan use her powers in a new way by having her make force bubbles in the team's throats to prevent negative zone creatures crawling into them. I found this to be very clever. Susan's abilities are perhaps even more versatile than Mr. Fantastic's himself, and I always applaud when a writer finds a new way to show what she can do. And Reed stretching his uniform and having Johnny burn a portion of it off to make enough fabric to fashion a new suit for another character was inspired as well. He also made some artistic decisions that may not mean much to some people, but meant a whole lot to me. Ross drew Reed's stretching according to the rules Kirby set up and John Byrne set in stone, and which were then ignored by later artists. When Mr. Fantastic stretches, his limbs should not be articulated. His whole limb becomes a tube of sorts, with no definite elbow or knee. Also, Reed should not stretch his neck. Kirby hardly ever did this, and when he did, it just didn't look right. Byrne described neck stretching as something befitting Plastic Man, and I agree. It just lacks a subtle dignity and makes Reed look a little bit silly, to say nothing of putting his head and neck at increased risk of injury. These are not official rules in any way, and I don't dislike it when artists do these, but I appreciate it when artists respect the characters and artists who came before them. Ross adhered to these rules the whole time. Alex Ross told an adventure tale, with action and humor balanced very well. A problem shows up, the FF stop it, defeat an old villain, and make new discoveries along the way. The execution was not perfect, but the idea was rock solid. Add to that a remarkable attention to detail. Various negative zone monsters we've seen only in one panel before show up again, and an excellent imitation of many of Kirby's stylistic elements, the technology and architecture. This book really felt like the Fantastic Four. But unfortunately, as good as the pros were, this book did make quite a few missteps. I will start with the biggest mistake of all, the fact that this is a sequel to Fantastic Four issue 51. This Man, This Monster has long been considered the very greatest issue of Fantastic Four. Some might even say of comic books, period. Making a sequel to this is, in my opinion, an unforgivable offense. The hubris involved in thinking you are good enough to follow up a Stan Lee story that he never felt was necessary to revisit is appalling. Issue 51 was halfway through his run. Stan had more than enough time to write a follow-up had he felt it necessary. He didn't, so no one else should. Not with this tale. I don't mind Alex Ross revisiting Janus the Negative Man, but leave the scientist from This Man, This Monster alone. I'm not saying Alex Ross is an egomaniac. I think he fell into the same trap many new writers fall in. writing what they want to read. He reckoned not with two very important comic book adages. Len Wein used to say, "The first story you do as a fan should be the last story you do as a pro." And Stan Lee himself always said, "Never give the fans what they think they want." Both of these are pithy ways of saying to leave your fan think at the door when you become a writer, and don't tell stories that, as interesting as they might be, don't need to be told. Nothing good can come of it. Had Alex Ross paid heed to those words of wisdom, he never would have written this book. However, he did write it, so I have to judge it on those merits. I was repulsed by the idea that the scientist had survived. The beauty of the original story was that he died heroically. The scientist realized the world needed Reed Richards, and instead of letting Mr. Fantastic die with him, he threw Reed to safety. The scientist doesn't know if he saved Reed, but he finds comfort in finally doing the right thing as he hurtles to his death. The finality of death is so important in a redemption story. It shows that a character is facing his punishment head-on, ready to atone for the sins he has committed. Robbing him of that is wrong. Just listen to the scientist's final words as he sits on an asteroid, rushing to an explosive doom. As for me, I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. Not many men get a second chance to make up for the rotten things they've done in their lifetime. I guess I'm luckier than most. I got that chance. For I finally learned what it means to have a friend. This is one of the most powerful moments in not only comic books, but perhaps even 20th century literature. A man dies to save someone he has come to admire and respect. How dare Alex Ross tamper with this? The scientist surviving undermines the whole point of the story. If there is any strike against this book, this is it. But with what Ross decided to go with, I think he did a good job. The scientist, who was given his later revealed name Ricardo Jones, another element I didn't like, survived, and, inspired by the greatness he came to know in Reed Richards and Ben Grimm, became the leader of his own Fantastic Four-like team on the Negative Zone's version of Earth. This isn't too bad. Ross didn't take a deconstructionist approach that other writers like Frank Miller or Alan Moore would have, full of grim and gritty gloominess. He told a positive, uplifting story of redemption. The scientist didn't revert to his evil ways and try to kill them again, but instead used his genius to help those around him. If a follow-up had to be told, and the scientist didn't die at the end of issue 51, I would prefer this outcome to any others. Another aspect I didn't like was the nature of the Negative Zone being revealed as psycho-reactive, where your negative thoughts manifest themselves as physical threats. Not only does this fly in the face of stories that came before it, but it also complicates what has always been more or less straightforward. The Negative Zone is a dimension just like ours, that is filled with good and bad. Look at Fantastic Four's 251 through 256. But the bad has more power, what with creatures like Annihilus and Blastar, and threatens our dimension from time to time. Delving any deeper into that is a fool's errand, because it does nothing to enhance future stories, but instead limits them to a narrow field of possibilities, all of which being filled with unnecessary psychobabble. In short, Alex Ross didn't leave the toys the way he found them. He changed what came before, and for what? Nothing. It adds nothing to have the Negative Zone this way. If Stan wanted the Negative Zone to be psycho-reactive, he would have said it. Now, being a standalone, I don't think this matters too much. I'm not even sure if this is considered in continuity. However, one should always be careful when adding new details to lore in a standalone. Just look at how much damage came to Batman via Killing Joke and Dark Knight Returns. Neither of those were in continuity when they were written, but elements were pulled into the main titles, most of which either limited characters, Barbara Gordon, or completely rewrote them. Batman, Joker, Commissioner Gordon, Alfred, Catwoman, Superman, etc. Other minor annoyances were the uniforms. I did not like the zipper that Ross included in the Fantastic Four's regular outfits. This is not how they have always been drawn, nor have they have been described. They are not made of normal materials. They probably don't even have regular stitching as we know it. They are made of Reed Richards' own discovery/invention, unstable molecules. They do not work exactly like normal fabric. Adding a zipper makes the suit mundane and ordinary, the exact opposite of what they are. Ross gave the team new suits for their trip to the negative zone in this graphic novel, and the zippers on those don't bother me too much. These are specialized suits that Reed created. But what does bother me is the redesigned 4 emblem. My issue with this is twofold. One in-universe, and the other out-of-universe. In-universe, I do not believe that Reed would change the design. Their 4 is iconic, and even when it was given the drop shadow during John Byrne's run, the 4 itself was not altered, just added to it a little bit. Ross's design is altogether different. As neat as you may think it looks, I feel it is out of character for Reed to change their logo. I mean, his wife did design it. I just don't see Reed changing what doesn't need fixing. And let's look even deeper into this. The Fantastic Four is part business. They merchandise themselves to supplement their income. In this very story, Johnny Storm is wearing an Old Thing t-shirt from the 70s, showing that in Ross's view of the team, they merchandise themselves. So why would they suddenly change their logo? It wouldn't make sense. It can be argued that this is just for their trip to the negative zone, so it wouldn't confuse the public seeing them with a different design. But in that case, why would Reed change it just for one mission? It doesn't make sense to me, and I feel it was a misstep. And now, out of universe, I am again struck by the ego that would prompt anyone to alter something as iconic as the Fantastic Four's logo. The final big problem for me was Ben Grimm's language. At one point, he calls the Human Torch an ignoramus. That isn't a bad word, but it's just not something you would normally hear coming out of the Thing's mouth. Flame brain, nincompoop, crumb bum. These are all more fitting to the Thing's character. The Thing also cursed at one point, something he has not been shown to do. He uses substitutes for curse words, that's for sure, but flat out saying one is another thing altogether. He is always quick with the verschluggener, blamed, or blankety blank, but he never really curses. The Thing is surprisingly conservative in his nature, contrasting oddly with his otherwise gruff demeanor. Making him curse is a no-go in my book. All ages characters should speak in a way that is safe for all age readers to enjoy. Those were the big issues. Now to some lesser quibbles that I still feel are worth mentioning. I wasn't a fan of Reed using a pop-up hologram as a navigational device. Reed's forte is hardware, and it's one of the places where Kirby's artistic talent was showcased the most. Just flip through any Kirby issue of Fantastic Four and look at all the bizarre instrumentation. It is not only a mind-boggling achievement of art, but it is useful shorthand for showing how smart Reed is. Reed Richards is a brilliant scientist and inventor, almost unrivaled. Remember, only Dr. Doom is smarter than Reed. That means Mr. Fantastic is more intelligent than Bruce Banner, Tony Stark, Hank Pym, and any other Marvel super scientist. Having a physical device of his own invention is a much more effective way to show that than one purely of holograms. Reed having bulky hardware also made for many memorable moments. How many times has the Thing held up a 10-ton piece of equipment for hours on end, just for Reed to not need it after all? Situations like that is where character is shown. But a scene like that can't be done with nanotechnology and software, like was shown in Reed's navigational device. And it would have fit much better with the Kirby aesthetic this book otherwise stuck to, if Reed had a funky handheld gadget with odd angles and blinking lights. As Ben says in FF 237, "You mean, that's it? No flashing lights or funny noises? I'm disappointed. Your gizmos always have flashing lights and funny noises." Not just a funny moment, this is also a keen observation. Reed's inventions are exciting to look at. They do things. They are physically there. As petty as this nitpick may seem, I think having Reed delve into intangible technology is a fundamental misunderstanding of his skill set and his practical nature. I just don't understand why he would have made that stylistic choice. It is clear Alex Ross respects the legacy of Jack Kirby. He even has a Jack Kirby painting on the wall of the Fantastic Four's living room. He seems to worship the guy. And while that isn't a bad thing in and of itself, it does bring me to the final critique, which may seem small, but is in fact at the very heart of all of my complaints. I wish he would have respected Stan Lee as much as he did Jack Kirby, and not told this particular tale. Alex Ross could have used this opportunity to tell a tale of his own, but instead relied on the crutch of a classic story. I feel that this did not live up to its full potential. Alex Ross writing his first FF story, but he's piggybacking off of an old one? And the unbalanced approach of respect for Lee and Kirby evident in this book upsets me a great deal. I will take nothing away from Jack Kirby. He is the king for a reason. But Marvel would have been better off without Jack Kirby than without Stan Lee, and that is an indisputable fact. In recent decades, it has been cool to attack Stan and attribute his successes to Kirby, and then go even further and say Marvel was bad to Kirby. Both are untrue. Compare what Lee did without Kirby, Spider-Man, Daredevil, Doctor Strange, to what Kirby did without Lee, New Gods, The Demon, Forever People. I mean no disrespect to Kirby. I love all of those characters he created. But nothing he created touches what Stan Lee did. Stan Lee is the single most important man in comic books. And as to Marvel's treatment of Kirby, Marvel treated Kirby the same way Kirby treated his employees when he ran his own comic company, Mainline. Only Will Eisner had the gumption to put his money where his mouth was and run his business differently. I just don't like the disproportionate respect. I know it's Ross's prerogative who he throws a bone to, but it plays into a greater problem in comics when you only show love to Kirby and none to Lee. Kirby may be king, but Stan is the man. Nuff said. So what do I feel about the book as a whole? Well, that's a bit complicated. I have delved much deeper into the negatives than the positives to explain what I found wrong with the book. And while I stand by everything I said, I don't want it to seem like I hate it. Because I don't. The positives of Fantastic Four Full Circle were very good. I am very glad I read it, and I will cherish it for what it is. As I mentioned before, it was an interesting story with excellent art that treated the characters, if not their entire mythos, with love and respect. In the end, you really can't go wrong with that. So if you are looking for a fun Fantastic Four adventure to just enjoy and not overthink, this is probably perfect for you. But I would bear in mind that if you are a super fan of the world laid out by luminaries like Lee, Byrne, and others, it leaves quite a bit to be desired. Thank you very much for listening. Until the next video.